It's amazing how much a fighter's career trajectory can be completely altered after just a couple of fights. A year and a half ago, before Suga Sean O'Malley was going to fight Petr Yan, the narrative surrounding that fight going into it was that Suga didn't deserve the opportunity to fight the former champion, and that he was getting way in overhead with that matchup. A year and a half and just one more fight later, Petr Yan is out of the title picture altogether, and O'Malley is the UFC bantamweight champion, getting ready to make the first title defense of his career. Anybody who's been watching MMA for any amount of time knows full well that fans of this sport are fickle as hell, and that a great deal of the fans' opinion on a fighter is based primarily on recency bias as opposed to the actual body of work as a whole. Memory is unreliable at the best of times, but it's especially bad when it comes to this sport. It seems crazy to think now, but heading into the Yan fight, the general consensus was that O'Malley was being a lamb led to slaughter. Bearing in mind the fickle nature of perspective in this sport, before that fight took place, I went back and watched every single one of O'Malley's UFC fights, and came away from it not outright picking him to win, but being absolutely certain that it was going to be a competitive fight at the very least. I did a piece on that fight here on Sherdog before it happened stating this, and sure enough, Suga went out there and got the major upset. And when I say major upset, this was the overall consensus. But to anybody that tuned out all the noise and nonsense that the sport is plagued by, and took the time to go back and focus on nothing more than the performances themselves, the outcome wasn't surprising at all. Before the Yan fight, my biggest takeaway after rewatching all of Suga's UFC fights was the growing confidence he had every time he stepped into the octagon. Another thing I noted was that there wasn't a single fighter he had faced up until that point that wouldn't bite on his feints, and Yan ended up being no different in this instance. So last August, ahead of the title shot against Aljamain Sterling, it was basically the exact same scenario as it was heading into the Yan fight. Maybe not that he was severely outmatched, but he was the underdog in a fight that next to nobody was picking him to win. So I did the exact same thing I did before the Yan fight. Went back and rewatched all of his UFC fights as well as Aljo's, and afterwards, I came away feeling as though it was Suga's fight to lose, and that he was likely going to be crowned world champion. I did a piece for Sherdog ahead of that fight stating all of this, and sure enough, much to the surprise of many, O'Malley knocked out Aljamain Sterling in very impressive fashion. I had much the same reasoning at the time as I did before the Yan fight. The growing confidence he was having was going to be at an all-time high coming off the Yan win, and his ability to be composed in high-pressure situations, coupled with where Aljo was at in his career, and the effectiveness of his feinting, gave great reason to think that he was going to be getting the belt wrapped around his waist at UFC 292. I felt as though the feinting would be enough to keep Aljo from getting too close, allowing the fight to be upright for longer than most expected, and that his accuracy would win out. A lot of fighters feint, but I can't think of any that had the success rate with it that Suga does. It wasn't until after that fight that something occurred to me for the very first time as to why this is, and I believe it's the quickness of his movement. UFC production values are the highest you're going to see in professional sports, but there are certain things that cannot be picked up from watching in the comfort of your own home. One of those things is the quickness of Suga. He makes everyone flinch and hesitate every time he feints, and I believe it's because of the quickness of it. I think it's a lot faster and jarring than most are prepared for when they get locked in the cage with the bantamweight champion. It's a very effective tool for him. That, coupled with his accuracy and being in the rare percentile of tall and rangy fighters that actually has the ability to use that length properly. As we head into UFC 299 when the octagon sets down in Miami, Florida, it's a totally different dynamic now because it's a situation where the masses are seeing O'Malley as the favorite, and now it's Chito Vera that's more of a sitting duck. Just by virtue of that narrative, I find myself being very cautious about making any predictions ahead of this fight, because it's always when something feels like it's a foregone conclusion that this sport puts you right in your place and reminds everybody that you don't know a damn thing. While we have a sample size to work with, as these two fought back at UFC 252 in 2020, I feel like that fight was just too long ago to look too much into. Chito got the win by TKO, and not to take anything away from him, it was in larger part because of a foot injury sustained by Suga in that fight. I can't help but feel like this contest has all the makings for an opportunity for Suga to put off another fight where he gets an opportunity to style on his opponent. I absolutely love Chito. I was on location in Vegas and covering UFC on ESPN when he fought Rob Font. I was sitting cage side for that performance, and the fortitude he showed in that bloodbath left a very strong impression on me. But when I look at this fight, I cannot help but think about Vera's tendency to be a slow starter against a fighter who is incredibly composed and firing on all cylinders from the moment the ref gets out of the way. Being a slow starter kind of has a negative connotation, but depending on the style of fighter you're going up against, it can actually be a really great quality. Being strong and performing better in the mid to later rounds can be a good thing against a lot of fighters, but I personally don't believe it's a good thing against a guy like Sean O'Malley. But the dynamic going into this fight for Suga is worth noting. It's not that there wasn't any pressure in his last 2 fights, but being considered the underdog also comes with a bit of leeway and forgiveness when it comes to the outcome. For this fight, O'Malley is the betting favorite to win, so the pressure on this one is without question going to be a lot more than the past couple have been for him. But the thing is, one of O'Malley's best qualities is that he's the type of guy that when the lights are at their brightest and the pressure is at an all-time high, he's at his best. Yes, he has effective feints. Yes, he has super accurate, technical, and powerful boxing. But above all else, he's a performer through and through. Anything can happen in this game, but with UFC 299 happening in Miami at this point in his career where he's just moving into his prime, it's just too big of a moment for him to not capitalize on. His confidence is yet again at a whole new level, and it's hard to imagine this weekend being anything other than the next installment of the Suga Show.